Welcome everybody to We Heart Therapy, and thank you for staying tuned. Today we're going to talk about a very exciting topic, and that's forgiveness. And there are a lot of myths around forgiveness, and so I've invited a special guest, Mark Whelchel. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you may recall him from some of our other videos in this series. And he's agreed to talk to us about forgiveness. Thank you again for joining us.
It's great to be back with you.
So let's talk about the idea of forgiveness, because we know that's one of the big things that clients struggle with when they come into our office. So what would you say some of the biggest myths are that our clients have about forgiveness?
Well, in terms of myths or misconceptions about forgiveness, there are a bunch, I think. One is kind of the idea that, well, if I'm forgiving, it's really saying, oh, it's not a big deal, it's okay, and that, you know, it really wasn't the offense that it was, and that it's like somehow making it okay.
Right. So by forgiving, they're somehow letting that person off the hook. And then they're saying, oh, well, it's okay that you did this to me.
Yeah.
And that's not really the case.
Right. Yeah. And I think another big misconception or myth is that if I forgive, it means I am also restoring the relationship, which may happen, but it may not as well. To me, forgiveness is something an individual does. It's a choice that they make to forgive another person, but whether or not they also make a choice to restore that relationship really has a lot to do with what the other person does. You know, have they done anything in terms of asking for forgiveness or any kind of an apology or restitution?
Have they shown remorse?
Yeah, and anything that shows that they will own their part and be willing then to make amends and restore a relationship. And even then, it might take some time. For
and that's really important too, because oftentimes I think people think that forgiveness is for the other person, the person who committed the offense or caused the hurt, and forgiveness is not for them, it's for us, right? Right,
yeah. It benefits us. We live at greater peace. We have, I think, honestly, greater joy and other things when we've been able to, in forgiveness, let go of something, a wrong that was done against us. I know often when I'm talking with clients, I'll kind of give the idea that when we've been injured, when we've been hurt by another, we really have three choices. There's like three roads that we could go down. One is to say, it's no big deal, I'm going to sweep it under a rug, which to me then means they're having to deny the emotions that they have, which is going to affect them in the long run. A second choice would be, I'm never going to get rid of this. I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to obsess on this. I'm going to get, and ultimately it leaves us angry. It leaves us bitter. And then really the third option is to forgive. And it's that, to me, is the option then that, like you said, it's to our benefit. It leads us to peace because of the choice that we've made to forgive.
And when we fail to forgive, I mean, we see clients come in and they struggle with deep anger, you know, a lot of hurt. They become bitter and resentful, and you find that they also focus on the person or the event that took place that caused this, and they're losing sleep, they're anxious, they're angry. Meanwhile, the person who committed this offense is sleeping just fine, and you know, there's no problem. And so by not forgiving, they basically emotionally enslaved themselves to this wound or this person who's caused an offense. And so in order to break that chain, forgiveness is needed for their own relief.
Yeah, to just be able to say, I am making the choice to let go of this. I'm not going to seek revenge, you know, continue to think about and, you know, obsess on this. And that frees them, gives them more peace. Now, another misconception that kind of goes along with that is a lot of times people will tell me, well, I made the choice to forgive, but I don't think I made it well enough because I still have some anger, or I still am struggling in a way. And one of the ways I try to help them to think through that is, I do believe forgiveness is a choice. It's a decision that we make, but a lot of injuries bring out grief, and our grief is going to take a while. There's going to be times that we feel sad or we feel angry. That doesn't mean we haven't forgiven.
Right.
And so I'm often saying, do your best to submit those emotions to your decision to forgive. You've made the right decision for you.
Right.
And now when those emotions come up, just remind yourself, no, I've let that go. And it's kind of a mental exercise to kind of do some thought stopping, put it back underneath that decision to forgive.
Right. And as your emotions heal, as your heart heals, it will become even easier over time to not have that come back and bite you. But it also sounds like, when we forgive, we're really saying that we're not saying that it's okay what this person did to me or that this thing happened. What we're saying is that I'm not going to hold it against you or the relationship or seek revenge. I'm letting go of the need for revenge or to get back at you because of this.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
sort of trying to release the power it has over the self.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I work at a center that it has a faith base as well, a Christian base, and I think adding in that element is the idea of letting go is really, it's not just letting it go into the abyss, but letting it go to God and trusting that God's going to care for us. And that, so that for people who have that as their background, I think that's also a helpful way of thinking about forgiveness. I'm giving this over to God to handle my needs and to protect me.
Right. And that reminds me of another myth that I find that a lot of people have, is that they need the other person, their participation in the forgiveness. And then it comes to, like, what if that person has died or moved away, or you're not on speaking terms, and, having this forgiveness event is not possible with that person. You don't necessarily need that person to go through the forgiveness steps.
Process, right. I agree. Yeah, it's the decision to forgive is a personal and individual decision. Now, at times, the other person may be involved, and that's great. That most likely is going to, if it's a good involvement, lead to the possibility of restoration of that relationship. But sometimes that person isn't involved, doesn't want to be involved, can't be involved, like you said, may have passed on or have cut off all communication. But the individual can still do their work of saying, I do not want to be thinking about this and obsessing about this, and I'm going to let it go and forgive.
And that's really important, because when the individual feels empowered to make that choice, then in those instances where that other party is not available, like let's say that there's an adult child who is very angry at an alcoholic parent, and they need to work towards forgiveness of that parent, but that parent has since passed on. Some people feel like they're doomed to walk in this anger and this bitterness for the rest of their life, because that problem was buried with that parent. But that's the thing, is that it wasn't. It's still living in that person's life.
Yeah, inside of the person. So we have the power then. A person has the power to deal with that and work through that and let it go. And again, it's going to be to their benefit to do that. And there's lots of ways that we can write letters that we never send. We can do things that are means of working through the hurt that we've had from the offense.
Right. And so, and also again, like you talked about the forgive and forget, forgiving doesn't mean necessarily turning a blind eye and allowing somebody to repeat an offense.
Right.
But it doesn't, by forgetting, what we're really saying is that we're forgetting to hold it against them.
Right. And with any offense, especially the more traumatic the offense, we're not going to forget. I mean, it is in our memory. But what we choose to do with that memory is very important. And so if we're saying, yes, this happened, but I am not going to continue to focus on it. But, again, we're not going to forget larger offenses.
Right. So what would you recommend to our clients who might be watching this, who are struggling with unforgiveness? What do you think would be one of the first steps to help them move towards the space of forgiveness?
Yeah. I think one of the first steps is starting to recognize that at this point, especially if the offense was a little, a while ago, and they're still holding on to it, that at this point, the bigger problem, the thing that they're struggling with more is honestly not the offense. It's how they're thinking about it, how they're maybe obsessing on it or not letting it go, that now is the bigger problem. And once they recognize that and recognize I have power over that, I don't have power to erase the offense, but I have power to change what I'm thinking about and how I'm thinking about things, and power to let this go, then to me that's kind of then their second step of recognizing the problem now is lying within me, and there's something I can do, mainly forgiveness, that is a process of letting go.
Right, and when they don't let go, it sounds like they sort of allow that wound to keep re-injuring themselves.
Yes, and they're either going to get more and more angry and bitter, or more shut down.
Yes.
One of the two.
Yes, and through forgiveness, you can work from being bitter to being better.
Yes.
Excellent. So, can somebody find a therapist who will help them work with forgiveness?
Well, certainly. I think all therapists have training in helping people work through forgiveness and deal with past hurts.
And so you're here in Las Vegas, you're at the Renewing Life Center, and that is Christian-based counseling center, but you don't have to have a faith base necessarily to come see you. And so if folks would like to work with you, how can they find you?
Well, they can find us online. renewinglife.net is our website, and or call us at area code 702-434-7290, and they can come in and see me or see one of our therapists here.
Excellent. So we have Mark here in Las Vegas, as well as myself. And if you're not in the area, you can also perform a simple Google search to find a therapist in your area who's skilled and will help you work towards forgiveness. Remember, this isn't a life sentence, and it's definitely not something that you have to work through alone. And if you are struggling with forgiving somebody or forgiving yourself, then that's something that you should seek out the skilled help of a skilled therapist. Now, that does remind me of a very important point, too, that I want to make sure we don't forget is forgiving oneself.
Yeah.
And we find that a lot of clients that come in, maybe they've had an affair or they've done things to a partner or other people, and they feel a lot of shame and guilt, and they hold themselves. So how would the process of forgiving themselves be possibly different than forgiving others?
I actually think of it as being fairly similar. Similar to forgiving others, typically we think about, well, what was the offense? How have we been hurt, or how have we hurt somebody else? And kind of tell and retell that story in our mind and to others as we're trying to make sense of it. But then, as we've done that and we recognize, yes, I've done something that has been hurtful to others, or that I'm ashamed of or have guilt about. And literally, I think that's a human condition. We've all been there. We've all done things that we wished, we could turn the clock back, do it differently. And but that process of, yes, I recognize this. I now, well, once I recognize it, is there any way I can make amends? I think that's another step that is important to take. And sometimes we can't. The person we've hurt no longer is around. But to recognize it, to make amends, and then to say, I'm going to let it go. And I think, again, from a faith perspective, from a Christian perspective, it's I'm confessing what I've done wrong to God, asking for forgiveness, and then again, forgiving myself and letting it go.
And I find that very common with clients that do have a faith base. If you ask them when they struggle with self-forgiveness, if they believe that God has forgiven them, and they oftentimes say no. And I find that a lot of the same myths that we struggle with forgiving others will hold to ourselves, that if I forgive myself, if I start having a good time and smiling and laughing again, then my wife or my husband may think that I'm not really sorry and that I may do this again, and I don't want them to think that I don't take it seriously. So then they hold themselves in this very sad and painful place, and they plummet into deep depression because they can never escape this offense that they themselves committed that they feel terrible about.
Yeah, and they're not being more helpful to their family or to their friends because you're right, they shut down, they deal with depression and such because of the lack of forgiveness for themselves.
Right, and when they shut down and withdraw because of that depression, it takes them away from being with their family emotionally, a lot of times physically, if they escape into working more or into another room or activities that they're doing separately to cope with that. Then they're not with their family, which is where their family really wants them to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you again so much
You
for
bet.
being with us. This is such an important topic. Remember, if you're not in Las Vegas, find a really good therapist. You can look on Psychology Today. You can do a Google search. But remember, don't struggle with this alone. If you're in Las Vegas, make sure that you check out Mark Whelchel. He's at the Renewing Life Center, and they have a website online. Or you can find me. And thank you for tuning in to our videos. Make sure that you keep watching and hit subscribe. You're watching We Heart Therapy.